A few days after the October insurrection, the Winter Palace has been taken, the provisional government is under arrest, the Second Congress of Soviets is still in session.
Right.
Anatoly Lunacharsky is the newly appointed People's Commissar of Enlightenment. He issues a public invitation to the artists and intellectuals of Petrograd. He says, come to the Smolny Institute. Let us discuss cooperation. Let us build a new culture together.
And, exactly 6 people show up.
Exactly 6. The poet Alexander Bloch, the publicist Larissa Reisner, the painters David Sterenberg and Nathan Altman, the theater director Vsevolod Meyerhold, and the poet Vladimir Mayakovsky.
Yeah.
And Mayakovsky shortly afterward breaks off contact with the Bolsheviks and leaves for Moscow. That is the artistic intelligentsia's answer to the greatest revolution in history.
Wow.
6 people came,
Yeah.
and one of them walked out. This is In Defense of October, Episode 6, The Revolutionary Avant-Garde Art and Culture, Part 1, The Shock.
The question this part takes up is, who were the avant-garde artists before the revolution, and why, after initially recoiling from October, did they throw in their lot with the Bolsheviks? I'm host B.
And I'm host A.
We are not taking sides here. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of any political faction. We are examining the historical events and ideas as they are presented in the source material.
So, to really understand this deep dive, you had to step directly into the physical reality of those pre-revolutionary years. We need to ground this narrative in the concrete reality of who these artists actually were.
All right, because it's so easy to just project our own assumptions backward onto them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Russian avant-garde in the years leading up to 1917 consisted of figures like Kazimir Malevich and Vladimir Tatlin.
And Mayakovsky, of course.
Yes, along with Alexander Rodchenko and Wassily Kandinsky. You must completely dispel any preconceived notions about them.
Yeah, they were definitely not Marxists waiting for their historical moment.
Not at all. I mean, they were anarchists, they were Nietzscheans, they were subjectivists and bohemian idealists.
Their specific brand of radicalism was fiercely iconoclastic.
Oh, absolutely. They were entirely intoxicated with the liberation of the instincts. They held this deep, aristocratic contempt for the masses.
And that contempt was directly influenced by the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche.
Right, and you can verify this in the physical record. Vladimir Tatlin and Alexander Rodchenko actively worked in the activist group of the Moscow Association of Anarchist Groups.
Wow.
Yeah, they inhabited a world of absolute artistic rebellion against all existing structures.
Well, the precise nature of this rebellion requires careful delineation to comprehend the magnitude of their eventual realignment. The intellectual milieu they inhabited was saturated with an extreme individualism.
Right, which stood in direct opposition to any collectivist political program.
Precisely. They did not envision a reorganization of the economic base of society. They sought an absolute, unconstrained liberation of the creative ego.
So they weren't thinking about, class struggle or factory conditions.
Exactly. The structural confines of the Tsarist autocracy certainly oppressed them, but their proposed solution was not a proletarian seizure of power. Their solution was an escape into a realm of pure, subjective assertion where the artist reigns supreme over material reality.
Put yourself in their shoes for a second.
Yeah.
You are sitting in a smoky cafe in Moscow in 1915.
Okay.
You are wearing a wooden spoon in your lapel just to outrage the bourgeoisie. You are completely committed to tearing down traditional art.
But you are doing this as an individual provocateur.
Yes. You have absolutely no interest in organizing a labor strike. These artists were essentially like the ultimate contrarian tech disruptors today.
That analogy captures the structural dynamic perfectly, actually.
Right. They wanted to break all the existing systems and shatter every rule, but they had absolutely no intention of taking on the responsibility of running the actual company afterward.
Yeah, the ideological foundation of their work fundamentally prioritized the self over the social totality. We can observe this ideological framework explicitly articulated in their own contemporary manifestos and public declarations.
Do you have the Malevich piece from that anarchist paper?
Yes, I do. It goes like this. The banner of anarchism is the banner of our ego, and like a free wind, our spirit will billow our creative work through the vast spaces of our soul. This represents a pure distillation of philosophical idealism.
It really does.
Kazimir Malevich published that statement across a series of articles for the paper Anarchy between March and July of 1918. When we analyze the intellectual foundations of the Russian avant-garde, we consistently encounter a worldview fundamentally hostile to the materialist premises of Marxism.
All right, because it's all about the self.
Exactly. The historical sources demonstrate that figures like Malevich were profoundly influenced by the radical egoism of thinkers such as Max Stirner.
Hold on, let us clarify that for a moment. When you say philosophical idealism, and you bring up Max Stirner, you are talking about a very specific way of viewing the world.
Definitely.
The listener might picture traditional landscape paintings when they think of art before this era. Malevich was not doing that. He was painting basic geometric shapes.
Right, the black square.
Yeah, he painted a literal black square on a white canvas. He called this suprematism. Are you saying he considered this geometric painting to be a form of literal world building generated entirely from his own mind?
That is precisely the theoretical operation Malevich was executing. Stirner's philosophy elevated the individual ego above all collective material or historical forces.
So the physical world just didn't matter as much to them.
Right. The individual ego was the sole sovereign reality. For Malevich, suprematism was emphatically not a mere stylistic exercise in geometric abstraction. He conceived of his reduction of painting to basic forms and planes as an entire system of cosmic architecture.
And all of that was generated exclusively from within the sovereign individual consciousness.
Yes. The material universe was entirely secondary to the spiritual assertion of the artist. This philosophical idealism positioned the artist as a supreme creator, existing entirely outside the mechanical constraints of historical development or economic necessity.
That is a massive distinction. You hear a very lazy assumption today that the avant-garde was just the artistic wing of the Bolshevik Party.
Oh, constantly.
People assume they were always walking hand in hand toward a socialist utopia. We have to completely dismantle this myth. They were not some cultural vanguard working in tandem with Vladimir Lenin's political vanguard.
No, their intellectual origins were entirely separate.
Exactly. They had completely different origins. Malevich explicitly rejected the materialist conception that art should serve any practical or social utility.
He really couldn't stand the constructivists, could he?
No, he looked at the constructivists, who were other artists seeking to integrate artistic practice with industrial production and engineering. He despised them. He dismissed them entirely.
Yeah.
He actually characterized them as mere lackeys of the factory.
Well, the structural hostility toward material utility cannot be overstated there. Malevich viewed any subordination of the individual creative will to collective material needs as a fundamental betrayal of the spiritual mission of art.
So practical usefulness was basically a sin to him.
Precisely. The avant-garde prioritized subjective liberation over objective social transformation. They certainly sought to shatter aesthetic conventions, but they executed this destruction from a philosophical standpoint that prioritized the isolated genius over the organized working class.
It was just a totally different revolution.
Yes, they were engaged in a revolution of forms, entirely disconnected from the revolution of property relations.
And you can prove this disconnection by looking at their contemporaries in Europe. Look at the Italian futurists.
Right, that's a perfect parallel to bring up.
The Russians shared deep aesthetic affinities with them. The Italian futurists, under Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, published their defining manifesto in 1909.
Glorifying some pretty dark stuff.
Yeah, they glorified speed, they glorified technology, they glorified war. They literally called war the only cure for the world.
And we know where Marinetti ended up.
Exactly. Marinetti eventually became a fascist. He enthusiastically supported Benito Mussolini. The Russian avant-garde also displayed incredibly aggressive nationalist tendencies right before the revolution.
It's something people often gloss over.
Right. Vladimir Mayakovsky produced Tsarist patriotic propaganda back in 1914. Casimir Malevich produced Tsarist patriotic propaganda in 1914.
Wow, both of them.
Yeah. They designed jingoistic posters supporting the Russian imperial war effort against Germany. They were not underground revolutionaries preparing for a socialist uprising. They were operating entirely outside the Marxist political tradition.
The divergent historical trajectories of the Italian and Russian avant-garde movements underscore the political malleability of radical aesthetic forms. Formal artistic innovation does not inherently possess a fixed political valence.
So a radical painting doesn't equal radical politics.
Exactly. The glorification of industrial modernity, speed, and disruption articulated by the futurists could serve the reactionary mass mobilization of fascism just as easily as it could adapt to the emancipatory project of socialism.
That makes total sense.
The Russian artists were not theoretically immunized against the chauvinism of the First World War. Their initial enthusiastic participation in the production of imperial propaganda demonstrates the profound absence of a materialist critique of the Tsarist state or the imperialist nature of the conflict.
So you move the timeline to October 1917. The actual revolution happens. It comes as a massive shock to these artists.
The complete shock.
It completely ruptures their reality. The broader intelligentsia instantly boycotts the new workers' government, the academics boycott, the lawyers boycott, the engineers boycott.
They just walk off the job.
Yeah, they lock up the office, they hide the keys to the bank vaults, they refuse to run the ministries. They all assume this Bolshevik government will collapse in a matter of weeks.
Right.
The crucial detail is that even the extreme left artists refuse to cooperate. They stay away.
They wouldn't even meet with Lunacharsky, as you mentioned earlier.
Right. They hold deep anarchist reservations about collaborating with state institutions of any kind. They distrust centralized power. They distrust the immense discipline required to maintain a state.
This historical reality directly counters the prevailing bourgeois art historical consensus. That consensus routinely flattens a complex historical process into a simplistic morality tale.
Oh, totally. The narrative you always hear.
Right. The dominant narrative presents a scenario wherein wild, free-spirited artistic geniuses are inevitably and unilaterally crushed by rigid Bolshevik Philistinism. It suggests a fundamental, immediate hostility from the revolutionary state toward modern art, paired with an innocent victimization of the artists.
Which just isn't what happened.
No, the historical source material demonstrates that this interpretation is entirely false. The actual relationship between the Bolsheviks and the Avant-Garde was characterized by profound productive friction.
Productive friction, I like that term.
Yeah, it was defined by deep contradiction and mutual suspicion. The revolutionary leaders and the radical artists did not share a unified philosophical worldview. The artists clung to their subjectivist idealism, while the Bolsheviks operated on strict Marxist materialism.
Two totally different languages, basically.
Yet this very tension generated an environment of intense creative energy. The friction between the demands of a desperate revolutionary state and the unbridled experimentation of the avant-garde was the precise mechanism that made this period so exceptionally creative.
I want to push on that friction for a second. The Bolsheviks seize power, and the artists are actively avoiding them. 6 people show up to the Winter Palace when invited. 1 leaves.
Yeah.
How do you bridge that gap? The Bolshevik leaders must have known they had to prove they could actually hold on to power. They had to create a gravitational pull to bring these reluctant intellectuals into the fold.
Well, Leon Trotsky actually explained this dynamic beautifully. I'll read what he wrote. The law of social attraction towards the ruling class, which, in the last analysis, determines the creative work of the intelligentsia, is now operating to our advantage. The petty bourgeoisie ultimately gravitates toward the class that physically acts.
Which makes perfect sense when you think about it.
Trotsky wrote that passage to describe the precise sociological mechanism governing this shift in allegiance. The intelligentsia does not constitute an independent social class capable of executing its own historical program.
They're sort of stuck in the middle.
Right. They exist in an intermediate position, suspended between the fundamental contending classes of modern society. Prior to October, the avant-garde issued countless manifestos proclaiming their absolute independence and their desire to destroy the old culture.
But writing a manifesto isn't the same as tearing down a government.
Exactly. Radical declarations do not alter the material structure of society. The Bolsheviks did not issue artistic manifestos. They seized the state apparatus. They mobilized the working class. They formed the Red Army and prepared to defend the new society with physical force.
So you're saying these fierce, independent anarchists who hated state power eventually joined the Bolsheviks because they were simply drawn to the reality of power?
Yes, absolutely.
They respected the audacity of the physical action. They saw the working class actually dismantling the old world in practice. The workers were accomplishing with rifles and decrees what the artists had only achieved on canvas or in poetry.
That's exactly it.
This physical realization of absolute rupture exerted an irresistible social attraction. The artists recognized that the historical initiative had decisively shifted.
Precisely. The source material explains that the artists, despite their initial anarchist hostility towards state institutions, were compelled by the sheer magnitude of the historical event. They were drawn not to the theoretical program of Marxism, which they largely did not understand or accept, but to the undeniable reality of a class that possessed the capacity to execute a comprehensive social transformation.
Lenin basically knew they just had to wait them out.
Right. Lenin understood that the intelligentsia would only align with the revolution after the working class had demonstrated its capacity to govern. The relationship required the establishment of a new material reality to which the artists would eventually have to respond.
They had to prove they weren't going anywhere.
Exactly. The real disaster of 20th century culture does not lie in an initial Bolshevik suppression of art, but rather in the later bureaucratic destruction of the very conditions that allowed this productive tension to exist.
And you have to look at exactly when this gravitational shift happens. It happens during the most desperate period imaginable. You were looking at the spring and summer of 1918.
The conditions were just horrific.
The revolution is fighting for its very life. The country is completely surrounded. It is fighting the white armies. It is fighting foreign interventionists.
And facing internal threats, too.
Yeah, it is fighting internal anarchist adventurers who are hoarding weapons. The physical stakes are life and death. The state is literally hanging by a thread. This is the exact moment the artists finally come over to the side of the revolution.
Trotsky paints a very vivid picture of how bleak it was. Let me read this description of 1918 from his autobiography, My Life. At times, it seemed as if everything were slipping and crumbling, as if there were nothing to hold to, nothing to lean upon. One wondered if a country so despairing, so economically exhausted, so devastated, had enough sap left in it to support a new regime and preserve its independence. There was no food, there was no army, the railways were completely disorganized, the machinery of state was just beginning to take shape, conspiracies were being hatched everywhere. This text underscores the extreme existential uncertainty defining this specific historical juncture.
You cannot overstate the terror of that moment. You have no food.
Yeah.
You have broken train lines. You have active conspiracies in the capital.
It was total chaos.
The artists did not join a victorious, stable government offering lucrative commissions and comfortable patronage. They aligned themselves with a besieged fortress.
Right. They were throwing their lot in with what looked like a sinking ship to many people.
The significance of their political realignment is massively amplified by the severity of these objective conditions. They were forced to navigate a landscape defined by literal famine. They navigated broken supply chains. They navigated imminent military threats from multiple fronts.
The theoretical implication here is profound. The social attraction exerted by the working class was so powerful that it compelled these deeply individualistic, idealistic artists to commit their labor to a collective struggle whose outcome was entirely uncertain.
They had to give up all their bohemian isolation.
Completely. Their integration into the revolutionary process required them to completely abandon their bohemian isolation. They were forced to confront the brutal material requirements of state survival. The physical exertion demanded by the historical moment dissolved the boundaries between artistic creation and political defense.
You see an incredible physical transformation by 1919. The explosion of physical artistic labor is staggering.
It's hard to even wrap your head around the volume of work they produced.
Vladimir Mayakovsky had previously run off to Moscow to open a futurist cafe. It was a hangout for speculators and bohemian characters calling themselves futurists.
Right, just drinking and talking.
The revolutionary government rightly closed it down. Mayakovsky completely shifts gears. He begins producing Rasta stenciled posters for the Russian Telegraph Agency. He produces over 2,000 of them.
2,000.
He works day and night in a freezing studio. He writes the verse himself. He paints the practical instructions himself.
He's actually communicating vital survival information.
Exactly. He shows the illiterate masses how to clean a rifle. He shows them how to sew on buttons. He shows them how to identify and defeat the white armies.
It's incredibly practical.
Lisitsky takes abstract geometry and turns it into revolutionary propaganda. He designs the iconic poster, "Beat the Whites with the Red Wedge."
Such a famous image.
He creates a massive red triangle, physically piercing a white circle. It is simple. It is dynamic. It is unmistakable.
And Tatlin got to work, too.
Yeah, Vladimir Tatlin joins the Moscow board of the visual arts section of the People's Commissariat of Education. He designs his towering monument to the Third International. He plans to build it out of iron and glass. It is designed to physically dwarf the Eiffel Tower.
The scale of their ambition was just unmatched.
Kazimir Malevich starts teaching at the state-free art workshops. He and Lisitsky go to the city of Vitebsk. They paint massive 16,000-square-foot canvases. They decorate 3 entire buildings to prepare the city for factory celebrations.
Yeah.
The sheer physical output is relentless.
Alexander Rodchenko actually wrote about this new reality. Let me read his appeal. To the artist proletarians from April 1918. We, who are in a worse situation than the oppressed workers, are workers for our livelihood as well as creators of art. We who live in holes have neither paint nor light nor time for creating. Proletarians of the paintbrush, we must unite. Art was no longer mere aesthetic decoration, but an operational tool thrown directly into the social forge.
Proletarians of the paintbrush, that says it all.
It really does. The theoretical shift indicated by Rodchenko's document is critical to understanding the intellectual reorganization of the period. The avant-garde consciously redefined their entire social function.
They totally walked away from the old gallery system.
They definitively abandoned the aristocratic and bourgeois models of artistic production. Those old models positioned the artist as an isolated genius catering to a specialized elite market. Instead, these artists began to conceptualize themselves as cultural workers. They sought total integration into the broader proletarian struggle.
They essentially conscripted themselves. They took their mastery of form, their mastery of color, their mastery of composition, and they applied it to the immediate practical requirements of the Civil War.
They weaponized their own talent.
The barrier separating the artist's studio from the factory floor and the military front was systematically dismantled.
The abstract principles developed in the isolated pre-war years were rapidly weaponized for mass communication. This integration required a fundamental reorientation of artistic purpose.
You can't just paint a black square if you need to teach someone how to shoot.
Exactly. The creation of a poster instructing peasants on weapon maintenance, or the design of a monument celebrating international working-class solidarity, demanded a direct engagement with objective social reality. The idealistic, Nietzschean conceptions of the artist as an elevated, isolated figure were practically dissolved in the immense collective effort required to sustain the revolutionary state under conditions of extreme scarcity. They subordinated their ego to the structural necessities of the historical moment.
You cannot comprehend this era without understanding the material reality of this privation. They are executing this massive cultural transformation with absolutely nothing.
The supply shortages were absolute.
There was literally no paint. There was no canvas. Paper production has plummeted to 1/8 of pre-war levels. 75% of the printing presses across the country are physically broken.
75%.
They are immobilized for repairs, and there are no spare parts. These artists are working in unheated holes. They have no artificial light. They are boiling scraps to make pigments.
Wow.
Despite having nothing, these artists successfully reshape the entire visual culture of the 20th century. They do not do it in galleries. They do it in the streets. They do it on the sides of armored trains rolling toward the front. They do it inside the freezing factories.
So when you step back and look at the core question we started with, the old world of aristocratic patronage and bourgeois galleries was entirely swept away by the objective force of the revolution.
It was gone forever.
The economic conditions that previously sustained the production and consumption of fine art had been fundamentally dismantled by the political rupture of October. The artists, compelled by the immense historical gravity of the working class in power, threw in their lot with the revolution through intense physical labor.
They proved their commitment in the streets.
Right. They utilized their highly specialized skills to defend and organize the new, vulnerable state apparatus. However, a fundamental theoretical problem emerged directly from this practical collaboration.
Because the war eventually has to end.
Exactly. What would a truly revolutionary art actually look like in its mature form? Could the wild, abstract, pre-war avant-garde experiments, which were born out of philosophical idealism and anarchist individualism, truly become the cultural foundation of the first worker state?
That is the million-dollar question.
This question was posed with immense historical force, but it was not yet answered. The period of the Civil War demonstrated the supreme utility of the artists in the production of immediate propaganda and the urgent defense of the state.
But they needed a more permanent structure.
And they built one. The necessary institutional infrastructure, organized meticulously through the Commissariat of Enlightenment, was successfully assembled. The political commitment of the artists themselves had been rigorously tested and proven under the most grueling material conditions imaginable. The parameters for a new cultural epoch were firmly established. The laboratory for this unprecedented grand experiment was finally opening.
The old world of aristocratic patronage and bourgeois galleries has been swept away. The artists have thrown in their lot with the revolution, but what will they build? The laboratory is about to open. Next time on In Defense of October. Episode 6, The Revolutionary Avant-Garde. Art and Culture, Part 2, The Laboratory. The explosion of early 1920s experimentation. Suprematism, constructivism, Tatlin's Monument, Mayakovsky's poetry, Eisenstein's Battleship Potemkin, Dziga Vertov's Man with a Movie Camera, and Vsevolod Meyerhold's Biomechanics Theater. The laboratory is open next time.